The session is resumed.
Explain.
The chairman of the Committee on Finance is recognized, Senator Escudero.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also, as acting Majority Floor Leader, Mr. President, yesterday we closed the period of interpellation for the proposed budget of certain agencies that appear in our journal. May I ask, Mr. President, that the budgets of the aforementioned agencies be deemed submitted? I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, may I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 4968 contained in Committee Report number 90 and request the Secretary General to read the title only of the measure. So move, Mr. President.
Consideration of House Bill, resumption of the consideration of House Bill number 4968 is in order. We can dispense with the reading of the title. We can proceed with the business at hand.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, may I now ask that you recognize Senator Legarda, who will sponsor the proposed budget of the judiciary. Rather, Mr. President, may I withdraw that? May I move that we open the period of interpellation and debate for the proposed budget of the judiciary for 2015, and for this purpose, recognize Senator Legarda. I so move, Mr. President.
May the chair suggest that in order to put things in proper sequence, that we submit for consideration and approval of the budgets that we had tackled yesterday. Before
May I request for 1 minute suspension?
1 minute suspension. Session is resumed. We withdraw that suggestion. I did notice that the chairman of the Committee on Finance did so. Yes, we now recognize Senator Lauren Legarda to defend the budget of to present the budget of the judiciary and respond to questions. And for this purpose, we recognize Senator Pia Cayetano.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we begin, Mr. President, we would like to place on record the presence of Justice Perez of the Supreme Court, as well as the respective presiding justices of the Court of Appeals sa Sandigan Bayan and the Court of Tax Appeals.
Senator Cayetano, you have the floor.
Thank you. With the permission of the subcommittee chair, I'd like to ask some questions. My questions will primarily be on the family courts.
Gladly, Mr. President, I am more than willing to answer the questions and possibly the interventions of the good senator who has been advocating for the family and for women and children, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I would just like to know, let's start off with general information on where we are today. Based on Republic Act 8369, it is required that a family court be established in every province and every city. And I do have a list of RTCs designated as family courts, but I only have a list for NCR, and I don't even know if this is accurate. So may we hear from the chair, the subcommittee chair, on what exactly is our list of total number of family courts in the country, and where are these family courts?
Thank you for that question, Mr. President. In fact, during the budget briefing of the good Supreme Court, Chief Justice Lourdes Sereno in the Supreme Court, this representation asked that as one of the first questions. Because while I was not a senator yet then, it was then the late Senator Raul Rocco who authored Republic Act 8369, which established family courts nationwide. And this really is intended to sensitize the judiciary and the system so that those cases involving women, children, should be treated differently from the regular cases, Mr. President. And so my question was, is this a fully complied and fully funded law? Unfortunately, the answer I received was Congress in the past years has not completely funded it. However, it does not mean that we've abandoned the law. There are RTCs where family courts are housed, and these are 118 of the RTCs nationwide. Under the law, Mr. President, 172 family court should have been established. However, due perhaps to budgetary constraints, 118 RTCs have been designated to hear family cases and therefore family courts. I have a long list, Mr. President, of special courts for family cases. There's a good lady senator from Taguig want me to read.
No, you
NCR,
can just...
the First Judicial Region, etc. But it would take me several minutes because...
No, I would just
it
like
is
to get a
4
copy.
pages.
That would be fine.
Yes, I will submit this copy which enumerates, for example, in my city, Malabon, we have 2 family courts, etc. So it is divided into judicial regions, Mr. President, and this could be submitted to Your Honor.
Thank you. That will suffice. I'll be happy to look at that list. My next question is, you gave us a number of 118 over 172. So that would mean we have 54 lacking family courts, if my computation is correct. Do we have an estimate of how much it takes to establish a family court so we can estimate how much is lacking in the budget?
1.2 billion.
To fill up the 172. Right now, Mr. President, there's 118 in the RTCs which actually handle the family cases. So they perform the role of family courts. If we are to fully comply with the law so that the RTCs would hear the family cases, then perhaps we would need more than 1 billion. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the 1.2 billion needed so that we can fill up the need in full compliance with the law.
Just to clarify, this 118 are functioning,
Are existing
and functioning purely as family courts. They
No,
don't
Mr.
have
President.
double designations.
As family courts. And
These-
only designated to handle specifically family courts.
under the RTC.
Yeah, yes, yes, under the article.
These are performing exclusively for
Exclusively.
family courts
Okay.
established as RTCs.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
Can we clarify, if I may?
sure. Yes, of course, Mr. President.
Yes, po.
There are 100.
Jurisdiction. But they were
18.
given the special designation.
There are 118
Designated.
RTCs designated as family courts. Is that how we
There are
understand it?
118 RTCs designated to
No.
handle specially family cases.
There are
Designated as family
118
courts.
RTCs designated to handle, to act as family courts.
Yes.
All right. Apart from cases falling under this category, these RTCs would also handle cases of general other cases. Is that correct or not?
They're delegated to handle family court cases.
In my understanding, Mr. President, presently they are delegated to handle exclusively family cases.
All right. There are 118 family courts which are actually regional trial courts.
Yes.
And they handle exclusively
Family cases.
family cases.
Yes.
Now, how many more courts do we intend to establish?
Under the law, Mr. President, it is 172. So 172 minus 118, that is the number that is needed to fully comply with the law.
54 more.
Yes.
And how much, if with the continuous permission of Senator Cayetano,
Of course.
how much, first,
How much is the 1.2 billion?
Yeah, 1.2 billion.
can we spread into the record why we need 64 courts
54
more? Is it simply because the law authorizes 172 courts? Or would the caseload of the 118 courts really require an additional 64 courts? We would like to spread this into the record. So 2 questions. Is the 64 really necessary? And can we spread into the record why is it necessary? We have already 118 RTCs. What is the present load of the 118 courts that would justify the creation of 64 more courts, of 54 more courts? And how much do we need for the 54 more courts? We must remember here that because of the constitutional provision, we cannot reduce anymore the appropriation next year. I mean, in 2016, the moment we appropriate an additional 1 peso for the additional 54 RTCs. That can no longer be reduced by express provision of the Constitution. So the chair would like to find out the answers to 2 questions. What is the caseload of the 118 RTCs which are now acting as family courts? Number 2, to justify the creation or the funding of the additional 54 courts, and how much would it be?
300 per
The caseload, I understand. Oh, first of all, the question of the Senate President and the good senator from Taguig is there a need? I believe, Mr. President, when laws are enacted, this has been debated upon, there must be a reason why 172 family courts were established under the law. And as we understand it, it is the RTCs now that have been designated to solely and exclusively hear family cases, and they are therefore hearing this, and this is 118. Now, is there a need to establish so that we are compliant with the law? The answer, Mr. President, of this humble representation is yes, because it is a law, it was studied well, and there is a huge caseload of more than 61,000, Mr. President, for the 118 presently designated family courts. And the regular caseload should be around 200 to 300, Mr. President. So there is a need to establish more family courts, not only to be compliant with a more than 15-year-old law, but also so that the caseload can be...
The law did not say that we organize the courts on year 1. The law provided for 172 courts, and the presumption is that this is an authority to fund these courts, but there is no express provision or mandate or obligation to do it in 1 year. That's precisely why we are asking these questions. If there are 61,000 family cases now pending in the 118 RTCs, that's an average of 200. Is it? So 61,000 divided by 118 is how much? Huh? Sorry?
Approximately 516, Mr. President.
515.
divide mo, 500. And so the normal caseload would be 200 to 300.
So it's not 61,000. If the average case load is 200 to 300 times 118, that is not 61,000.
Actually, if I may,
Yes, please. I'm sorry.
yes, no problem, Mr. President. I'm happy to include you in our discussion. I would just like to put on record that the Committee on Women, the Committee on Women, which I chair, has had a hearing on this, and we bring this to the attention of the body in the discussion of the budget precisely because it was established that we do have a extremely high number of family court cases. The number I was actually given is 1,500 cases per family court, and that the dockets are clogged. We have so many cases, particularly on VAUSI, that are pending. And you will note that the VAUSI law we have, this is the Anti-Violence Against Women law that His Honor, the presiding officer, had helped, who was instrumental in passing this law, includes a penalty of imprisonment. And There are actually a lot of instances, Mr. President, where the accused spouse or partner is detained. And so what we gathered from the hearing is they have been in such a delay in hearing these cases. So, and since you're not allowed to compromise the case, you're not allowed to settle out of court, the spouses continue to be detained for a long period until the case is settled. So this is the situation that caught my attention, and I decided to take it up during the budget. So I do believe that I recognize His Honor's concern that there definitely, it would fall within our hands to determine the urgency of the need, but I think the time has come to address this shortfall. A lot of our gender-related crimes and civil suits would fall under the family court jurisdiction, and therefore, until we continue to have a shortfall of these cases, then as far as I'm concerned, it is also a gender issue, because it does not provide women with the access that they should have, and which is what we are trying to guarantee under our law.
I agree.
Yes. I hope I am not misunderstood.
Oh, not
Senator
at all,
Pia
Mr.
Cayetano.
President.
I am not saying that I'm against this.
Oh, I know.
What I'm just saying, I am exercising prudence because
Yes.
of the situation wherein once we put in a budget in the judiciary, we can no longer reduce it. So that's why we're asking how many courts are proposed to be created.
Yes.
Because, right now, if I know what the figure is, the one officially put on record by the sponsor is that there are 61,000 cases, 200 to 300 cases per court. If we follow that computation, it should be anywhere from 23 to 180,000 cases, not 61. At 200 to 300 per court. So we are just putting on the record the rationalization and the basis for spending public money. Maybe we can look at this in a more rational manner. Rather, this is not a gender issue. This is an issue of whether or not there is proper use of public funds.
Yes, Mr. President. I also would like to put on the record that the Senate President has been a staunch supporter of women and children's rights, and I did not construe his concern as a not being supportive. I do understand that it's an exercise in prudence to look at the facts and the data that we have that would justify the establishment of either a portion or all of the cases. In fact, if the courts, in fact, if we did find a way to find the 1.2 billion that Her Honor has mentioned is the amount that would be required, my question would be, if we did not have that full amount, then we would have to know where would the priorities be, because I would imagine that there are areas that are...
May I clarify my figures? I'm not an expert in math. I would clarify, it's easier now to deal with that, Madam Senator and Mr. Senate President. The 1.2 billion was the total amount needed to fund the establishment of family courts under RA 8369, assuming we did not have the RTCs designated to handle family matters, family cases. However, with the establishment of 118 under the RTCs, we only need 54. And so we computed it. Is it 54 or 64? 64, Mr. President. And that would mean more or less 400 million needed, not 1.2 billion, to be able to be compliant with the law.
Excuse me, if you deduct 118 from 172, my figure is 54.
54 na.
The Supreme Court is very good in math. They gave me 64. It's 54, you're correct.
But may I also ask Her Honor to clarify, when we say that there are 118 regional trial courts designated as family courts, is this a permanent? I know it has been explained that this is exclusive. They exclusively handle family-related cases. But does it mean that when you say they are designated, then it is only temporary? Because that is my understanding in the hearing that I had in my
glad you asked that
committee.
question. I'm glad you asked that question, Madam Senator. It has been designated, and unless reversed by the Supreme Court, then it stays as a family court.
Okay. So if we were to add 54 to complete the total number of 172, then it is as good as saying that we have 172 permanent courts
Yes.
hearing family-related cases.
Yes. In fact, the 1.2, if you compute that, who has a calculator, just to be accurate, could we request the LBRMA to compute if it's 1.2 billion and then 54, what is the amount? Is it 400? Huh? Because, Mr. President, there are also single sala courts which handle family cases which are not part of the 118 designated family courts, meaning that in areas where there are no family courts, family issues are being heard in regular courts. But let's not take this into consideration, because I am one with a good senator in trying to decongest the caseload of family cases. So while it is good that there are regular courts that address family issues, plus there are 118 RTCs designated solely and exclusively for family issues, let us still, hopefully, we are able to establish within our term the additional 54 to be fully compliant with the law.
Well, and is it not the intention that if we do establish another 54, then those courts that are hearing the family-related cases will stop accepting new cases? It will now be the new case. I'm assuming those courts that are hearing the regular courts that are hearing family cases are doing so because there is no designated family court in that area.
Yes.
Then if that is the case, then when we now fund new courts, then those regular caseload would either be transferred or they would stop receiving new cases.
It would depend on the caseload, yes, but
More or
the-
less,
the answer-
because the idea is to,
Yes.
the objective of the law was to provide
decongest.
to provide the exclusive jurisdiction to these courts. So it doesn't make sense that you would continue to give those other courts with those cases. But on that note, let me ask, if in fact a designated family court that exists today has a very high load, are there situations where the cases are actually referred outside that designated family court, or regardless of the number, that family court absorbs all the family-related cases?
There is no unloading, Mr. President, according to the Supreme Court. Unless they inhibit, then it has to be transferred elsewhere.
Okay. Yes, because again, I would have raised the point that those judges are specifically trained to handle, and so it should really be with them. I have heard of cases that were reported in my hearing, my hearing on this matter, where there are around 1,500 cases already, thus the congestion. So that is it.
May I have the recommendation of the good senator if we need 376,744,186,000 to be exact, to establish 54 family courts to be fully compliant with the law? May I know if that is the recommendation of the good senator and the Senate President?
May we again hear what is the figure of the needed amount? Is it billion?
I thought you said earlier 400 million. Nashock yata ako doon.
What is the amount needed? 300 plus billion?
I think it's million, Mr. President.
Well, that's why I'm trying to clarify.
376 million. What
How
did he
much?
say? Billion. 376 million.
Okay.
744,000.
300,
186.
300 how much?
I think you heard wrong. I said million. Okay.
Mr. President.
377 million. Okay.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Tama. Last Congress, we created, when I was chairing the Committee on Justice, we created over 200, a little less than 300 new courts. At least we provided legislative cover for the creation of new courts. Now, Mr. President, we followed the formula adopted by the Supreme Court, which is 300 cases maximum for RTCs, 500 cases maximum for MTCs. And we said zero backlog tayo sa creation ng courts, regardless of whether or not it's family court or whatever type of court you may have, drug courts, but we followed that ratio. So yung total number of cases divided by 300, dapat yun ang number of RTCs. There is legislative cover already to create that. Now, the only issue and question, Mr. President, is at what pace can the Supreme Court actually fill up and create these courts?
Yes.
So it's not so much a question of appropriating money really for it, because one of the issues, actually even in previous budget deliberations, was the money to create courts and fill up vacancies aren't being exhausted. Either because of kulang yung nag-a-apply, kaya may kulang-kulang 25% vacancy pa rin tayo sa positions ng judges sa JBC and for various reasons. So it's not so much simply providing for the money to create these courts. I think there's a deeper study would have to be undertaken to find out exactly what is the cause and reason why there is such a backlog. If it's a question of priority, then we might want to ask the Supreme Court, ano ba yung priority nila next year na pipilapan? Family courts ba? Drug courts ba? O yung general jurisdiction RTCs? Just a point of information, Mr. President.
Okay, just following up on the manifestation of the chairman of the committee, what the chairman of the committee is saying is that there is enough legislative authority for the creation of courts. That being so, the authority which has not been utilized insofar as the creation of the courts can be utilized for purposes of creating these family courts and designated as such, even if the authority is for the establishment of the RTC. In other words, the authority under the law passed sponsored by the chair of the Finance Committee can be utilized to create these courts and designate them as the family court. In other words, there can be possibly 54 vacancies there or unorganized courts, which can now be organized with that authority and be designated as the family court. That's what the chair of the committee is saying. May we know the response then of the sponsor?
Yes, Mr. President. So perhaps what we could do is to look at the budget of the judiciary and identify the areas which are not being used, if any, and
So-
with the
Which means
agreement-
that the next logical question is, of the authorized courts,
Yes.
how many have been organized? And how many are left unorganized? Which can be utilized now for purposes of the family courts.
There are courts that are established but not funded.
We are checking, Mr. President, the courts that have been established but not yet funded. I'm waiting
Out
for.
of the more than 300 unorganized courts, only 65 are funded.
Why? How did the others operate?
No, the question is how many courts have been authorized to be created and have not been created at this point, and there is already a
Based-
funding for them.
Based on this, Mr. President, 340
Yes, po, ang unorganized courts po.
is a number for the unorganized courts, which includes newly created courts. Only 65 of these are funded, Mr. President.
65 RTCs are funded but unorganized. Is that correct?
RTC and Presidential Court, MTCs.
These are not only RTCs, Mr. President. The 340 unorganized courts would include both RTCs and the MTCs, the municipal trial
May we
courts.
have the figure again?
340 consisting of both RTCs and municipal trial courts, but
we
only
thought we heard that-
65
okay.
are funded.
So 340 are authorized.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? Of the
340,
340, 65 are RTCs.
Yes, Mr. President.
Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
65 are RTCs or 65 are funded?
65,
You said earlier funded.
65 are funded from the 340 unorganized court, both RTCs and MTCs.
What is the 65? Are they RTCs? Are these RTCs funded?
The 65 are both RTCs and MTCs, Mr. President.
How many are RTCs?
Unfunded.
They are checking the
Funded.
figures, which are the RTCs and which are the MTCs.
Because that again supports the proposition of the chairman of the Committee on Finance that we look at this because these funds are automatically released on day one because of the fiscal autonomy. On January 1 of 2015, whatever funds are appropriated is automatically released and can no longer be reduced. The chair,
Mr. President, to clarify again, when the Senate President was the Finance Committee Chair, if I remember correctly, we changed the rule because of what the concern you said a while ago, that the monies are not released to them, meaning the Supreme Court, unless they actually organize the court. So only those courts that they actually organize, yun lang po yung perang binibigay din sa kanila.
that rule was only during when in this Congress. In the previous Congress, there was no such rule.
Yeah. So during my
Yes,
my time,
yes.
we started that rule. So kung may pangangailangan yung korte na filapan, kasi na-create naman na ho yun by legislative authority, that's the only time you release the funds to them.
That's correct.
So again, the ball may perhaps not so much be on Congress's side, but on the part of the judiciary.
Yes.
Because I'm not even talking about or mentioning savings from unfilled positions that were earlier given to them by previous Congresses prior to this rule. So there is leeway to fill up this gap without necessarily
Creating new
creating
and
creating a new fiscal space to provide this additional budget. Mr. President.
In other words, if we can determine that of the 340 authorized courts, if a certain number has been authorized for RTC, then the judiciary on its own can designate them as family courts. I think that is what the Senate President is saying. So that is my question now to the sponsor.
Yeah.
Can we get
The number of the RTCs. They're
well,
looking for it
can
now.
we find out from the judiciary what is the plan, no? Given that the authorization is already there, what is the plan in terms of rolling out these family courts? Because apparently the authority is already there, and per the clarification of the former chair of the Committee on Justice and now the our chair, the money will be released once they organize.
Okay. Mr. President, just to clarify, of the 340, which is by legislative authority designated as a court, only 65 are actually funded. Of the 65, there are 40 RTCs, and I believe the 25 are MTCs. Correct. Of these 40, none of these are family courts.
Oh, okay.
And just to clarify, Mr. President, the 340 are not funded by Congress and kept by the judiciary of the Supreme Court and kept for whatever purpose or realign the savings. These are completely unfunded, although they have the legislative authority to organize these courts.
All right. If 40 RTCs are funded, and I assume they have been funded for several fiscal years, why can we not organize them as family courts? It will take us the next year to organize them as family courts, and then come back to Congress and say, we have organized this as family courts, give us the budget for the remaining balance. There are 40 unorganized but funded RTCs.
Mr. President, there are 40 RTCs funded under the 65
That's
funded
correct.
courts.
Yes, there are 40 RTCs funded.
Funded, Mr. President.
These positions are vacant. Of course.
There are vacancies being
They are
filled.
vacant.
Some are being processed. Yes, there are vacancies.
Yes, they have been processed for years. We know that this is the situation. The point that we are driving at is if there is an urgent need to organize the family courts, why don't we organize some of these 40 RTCs into family courts, because that is within the authority of the Supreme Court. 118 RTCs have been designated as family courts. There are a total. It will take some time to fill up the vacancies. So why don't we utilize the funding for the 40 RTCs which are organized or vacant and designate them as family
Yes.
courts?
The answer is in the affirmative, Mr. President. According to Justice Perez, your classmate and roommate,
My
yes,
roommate.
he agrees with you. Yes. The 40 RTCs within the 65 funded courts can be designated to handle family cases, just like the 118 RTCs were designated to handle family courts. And that solves part of the problem.
Well, what I would like to know, though, is in terms of priorities, can we expect it to happen? Will it be? It can be, but will it be?
Yes, Mr. President, I have the assurance that it will be transmitted to the court for the determination by the NBank. And we will, after this hearing, after we pass a budget, I will
But-
personally follow it up.
Yes, but may I know? We've been able to dissect this far enough, so let me just bring it to its conclusion. If we're speaking of 40, would Her Honor be able to give us an idea at this point as to how many of those 40 could we reasonably expect to be used as family courts? 1/10 of that? Half of that?
They would have to study that, Mr. President, depending on the location of the new courts, the caseload. But is there an assurance? The question is of 40. The assurance is that it will be brought to the NBank, it will be discussed, and there will be certain considerations, which would include the location, the caseload, to designate them as family courts. In short, it would go through the process just like the 118 designated family courts did from RTC.
How many were organized and created in the last year, between last year and today?
How many were created? 2013, 2014.
And for that matter,
You mean
for
designated from RTC to family court?
well, created as a family court. I mean, like in the last 4 to 5 years, how many were created? I'd just like to see the progression. Were all of these created in year 1 and then we stopped creating?
No, but the question is how many were designated in the past year?
What I'm trying to see, Madam, Mr.
want- I
Chair,
know.
is
You
the
want to see-
progression.
You want to see
To
the
see that we have
effort.
not
You want-
forgotten about it.
Yes.
Baka naman masigasig tayo nung una, nung bago pa lang yung
Because
batas,
it's
and
a
then
Raul Rocco
may
law,
gap
yes.
tayo for the last few years. That's just what I'm trying to see. So whether it's how many were designated in the last year, the last 2 years, I just want to see the progression.
Yeah. How many were designated in the past 12 months?
Siguro na designated family court.
How many were designated in the past 12 months?
At least for last year, may mga 3 to 5.
I don't have the exact figure. However, they say that at least 3 to 5 were designated as family courts in the last 12 months.
So,
But if you want,
and
I could-
if we look at the previous years, would it be safe to assume that every year there are new designations, or not really? I mean, is it like one every three?
I was not-
I just that's what I want to
I
know. Like,
understand.
is this regularly taken up as a concern, such that it is evaluated yearly and there's a determination
Rest
made?
assured that it is taken up as a serious concern. And in fact, during the briefing of the Chief Justice, this was one of the first that she showed me, and she really embraces it as her advocacy, which I and you and many of us here believe should be fully complied with. And perhaps what I could ask them to provide, which is not readily available now, would be, since the creation of the law to the 118 to the present, what is the progression in
Yes.
terms of a number of RTCs designated as family courts? Could we have that before the end of office hours today?
Yes, those are actually included in the kind of information that we are actually required to transmit as our report to the Commission Against Discrimination Against Women. So it is vital information that we should have anyway
And I
to
agree with you.
provide women with the access to the court. So
I agree with you that there should be a progression. In fact, we should speed up the compliance with the law. And so there are two things, just to summarize what you've said so far. First, for them to give us the information from the creation of the law, what is the progression in terms of year to the present of the creation or designation of family courts. And second, of the 40 which will be brought to en banc after assessment, how many can qualify to be designated as family courts from the 40 funded RTCs. Does that comply with the requests of the good senator?
yes, it does. I thank the subcommittee chair for the information. and
Can I intervene just for...
of course, Mr. President.
Madam Sponsor, did you mention that we need 376 million to organize 54 courts?
Based on the math of the LBRMO, the answer is yes, Mr. President.
All right.
Tamang matino.
The next question is there a committee amendment that will add 376 million to the budget of the judiciary for this?
None as of now. However, if there's someone, and I would support it, and I would like to introduce it, as long as there would be a source of the funds, then we would want to include that as a committee amendment.
So right now, there is no committee amendment appropriating 376 million.
No, in fact, that was part of my submission. Is that correct? Based on the briefing of the Supreme Court, I wanted to include that as my own amendment. However, it was not
So
accepted because there is a need for a committee amendment to include this, and we have to find the source of funding for this, Mr. President.
so the decision of the committee is that at this point, it could not accommodate an additional 376
That
million.
is what I have been informed. However, I would like to introduce it as a committee amendment. If everyone in this hall agrees, I would be more than happy because this has been discussed in the back room during the briefing, and I brought it up, but I was told there was no source of funding.
Okay.
Is it therefore an amendment of the Senate President?
No. This is a committee report, and
Yes.
therefore...
It is not yet there, Mr.
it
President.
is not there.
Yes.
That's the information I'm eliciting.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've asked all my questions, and I am satisfied for now with the answers. Thank you.
Just so that it's on the record, Mr. President, that this representation did not neglect this, here is my list of priorities as committee chair for this. And it says the establishment of family courts or additional from the 118 designated family courts existing. I tried to, Mr. President. I cannot do it single-handedly. But if the chamber agrees, then I hope we can find the source of funding for this.
Mr. President, next to make his intervention is Senator Soto, the acting minority floor leader. I ask that he be recognized.
Senator Soto is recognized.
Mr. President, Earlier, I promised the justices I will not ask any more questions. I will keep my promise, but I would just like to ask for a submission, an update on the special drug courts, because in the 15th Congress, I filed a bill creating special drug courts. During that time, Chief Justice Corona and the Supreme Court, if I am not mistaken, if my memory serves me right, came out with a memorandum or a policy order of some kind to create or to designate special drug courts. So I would just like to ask that the judiciary submit to the Senate a brief and an update on how the special drug courts are doing, and if there is no longer any need for us to pass this bill. That's all, Mr. President. Just an update we are seeking. Thank you.
I thank you for that intervention. I join you in your advocacy to speed up for the expeditious action on drug cases, and it's a request of the Minority Leader to be briefed by the Supreme Court, by the judiciary on an update. Yes. They will comply. When is your deadline, Minority Leader? Before the budget is passed.
I will treat it as a Christmas gift. They can submit it before Christmas, Mr. President.
Senator Coco Pimentel is recognized to avail of the period of interpretation.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is an intervention to look for ways and means to help the judiciary, not to make life difficult for the sponsor, Mr. President.
Thank you to the bar top-notcher and to my chairman
In the
of
Justice,
the Justice Committee,
precisely, Mr.
who
President.
gives me the opportunity to act like a lawyer when he is not feeling well when I chair the Justice Committee. So I will welcome your friendly interventions.
Thank you, ma'am. I noticed that in the 2015 NEP, the Supreme Court originally proposed a budget of 25,497,384,000 for fiscal year 2015. However, what is now being proposed officially is 17,366,019,000. So may I know what programs and projects were deleted or reduced in the current proposal?
May I put on record the items which were deleted, Mr. President? For personal services, Mr. President,
Okay.
the deficiency in salaries and other compensation of Supreme Court and lower court and wages of halls of justice casual employees, 365 million, 748,000. For the proposed new positions, Mr. President, in the Supreme Court, 73 positions. You want me to give you each and every amount? Child and family courts, court legal researchers, first and second level courts, creation of 89 MTCC converted positions, 5 additional MTCC salas, the implementation of the Magna Carta for social workers, the deficiency in pension and survivors benefits, personnel benefits, deficiency in retirement and life insurance premiums. That is for personal services. For capital
That's
outlay,
part of the
Mr.
that's part of the
President,
365 million, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
Is that part of the 365 million, which was
think
cut
not, no.
or reduced, or not?
This
funded?
comprises part of the cut.
Yes, thank you.
In capital outlay, it includes land improvement, basic equipment, furniture of Supreme Court and newly created courts, building and infrastructure for 41 halls of justice, and the post lights of Supreme Court, information technology and connectivity, motor vehicles, integrated halls of justice, etc.
How much, ma'am, for capital
And
outlay?
for The total is billion to?
Yes po.
2.4 billion, Mr. President.
And MOE naman.
And for MOE, Mr. President, rehabilitation of 13 halls of justice, Mr. President, human resource development and capacity building, financial and judicial audit, professional services, hazard and judicial incentive allowance of judges. They should have hazard allowance, don't you think so?
That's my point,
Yeah. And
Madam
recurring
Sponsor.
expenses of newly approved courts to be organized. And that would total 1.3 billion more or less.
1.3 billion.
Would you want to restore
So-
all of this?
So that's the. That's all. That's 4 billion, around 4 billion.
Total, no?
But the cut is around 8 billion, right? Is that correct, Madam Sponsor?
The total, Mr. President, is 12.3 billion.
That was the total cut. Reduction in the.
For the whole judiciary, it would be
Okay.
12.3 billion.
So maybe I will just ask for a written report because I will consider this as the wish list of the
Yes.
the judiciary, not funded, no.
I wonder, you would probably know it better. Hazard allowance. Just like there's hazard pay for our teachers. Hazard allowance for judges. For everybody or for those in areas. Sabay, lahat naman.
Yes, we can consider that as a subject matter of a separate bill or law granting hazard allowances to judges, especially in areas declared to be hazardous.
Autonomous region.
I think the Supreme Court, the Office of the Court Administrator would have an idea on what stations lawyers are not particularly excited or interested in applying for a judicial position. So, parang to increase the interest, we have to give an incentive. So, part is a hazard allowance, hazard pay.
Ito po, 120 sa construction of justice, 500 million. Kasi ito po, to restore all. Based on the letter.
Ma'am,
What is the pleasure of the good senator to restore the MOE, the personal services, the hazard allowance, or would you propose legislation so that it can be funded next year?
well, I'm not ready to propose a specific amendment, but I will look at that concept of a hazard allowance for our judges. And
May I kindly give a copy to the good senator, a letter of the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, on their requests.
yes,
For
yes.
restoration.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor.
It is not possible to do so because it would mean looking for 12.3 billion within the budget. However, if you could work on it and find out a source of funding
yes, yeah,
for
yeah.
priorities.
And Madam Sponsor, moving on to another topic, the other side of the coin. It is also I have also seen a report that the judiciary has unused appropriations amounting to 3 billion plus in 2013. So, because of the unused appropriations of the judiciary in 2013 amounting to 3 billion plus, the total obligations was only 17 billion plus, despite the fact that total available appropriations for that year was 20.9 billion plus. So, does this mean that the judiciary has a problem in spending money given to them? So, does this reflect on the absorptive capacity of the judiciary? But please correct me if my figures are wrong. Please
Tama
correct
ba
me.
may savings kayo tatlo? You really have 3 billion in savings? Is that correct? 3 billion.
Are my figures wrong?
Sorry.
What is your 2013 yun, ha? 2013, ha?
1.8.
Ito po, this is our savings.
Just to correct, Mr. President,
Okay.
the savings for 2013 is 1.8 billion, not 3 billion. And just to give you an idea on the expenditures of the courts against savings, it would include the deficiencies in salaries, wages of casual employees, Magna Carta for health workers, year-end bonus and cash gift, productivity incentive bonus, RLIP, pension annuities, etc., deficiencies in transport services, in extraordinary and miscellaneous expenses, expenditures with budgetary allocation, overtime services, healthcare services, special allowances equivalent to rata, loyalty benefits, rice subsidy allowance, and the judicial incentive and additional expense allowance for acting, pairing, and assisting judges.
Okay, I ask that because we all want to give the judiciary all the resources they need, all the funding they need, but also we look at historical data if they have been also using their money properly and if they really need it. Ma'am, when I entered the session hall, you were already discussing family courts. Was part of the 12 billion reduction amounts connected with the with the establishment of family courts or just the designation of family courts?
The 12 billion included the establishment of family courts for 1.2 billion because, as I said, Mr. President, pursuant to RA 8369, the family court should have been designated as such. And as I said, since no family court was designated, then the RTCs have been designated to act as family courts. That's why we have 118 solely, exclusively handling family cases.
Do we have DBM present today? Because who made the cut? The cut was the Supreme Court made the proposal pursuant to RA 8369. DBM made the cut. May we know if there is DBM and the reasoning for the cut? Because
it's Department of Budget, Mr. President.
I know because we all interpret our laws. The Supreme Court interpreted RA 8369, added as the legal basis for establishment of family courts, then proposed in their budget an amount for them to comply with the law. DBM deducts or deletes the amount, meaning to say DBM has its own interpretation of RA 8369 that it is not necessary to establish family courts.
I'm glad you're citing that, Mr. President, because you will be surprised, maybe not, that there are so many unfunded laws, Mr. President. We keep on churning out laws in Congress, in the Senate, Mr. President, and the family court is not the only law that remains unfunded. There are many more. In fact, I would like to ask the Department of Budget and Management, LBRMO, to kindly give us a list of all the unfunded laws and how much, how many billions. Because I remember for the past 15 years that I have been here in this institution, we have always brought up the issue of unfunded laws.
But ma'am, but I want to know why. I mean, is the lack of funding for the establishment of family courts by the DBM a result of their interpretation of the law, which might be wrong? Okay, ang question ko na lang, has the DBM ever funded, we ask the Supreme Court, has the DBM ever funded in the Supreme Court budget the establishment of a family court? Never. Ano po? Sumagot na si Justice.
Yes. Mr. President, I will answer you so that it's on record.
Yeah.
The
Never.
family court law has never been funded since its enactment into law by Congresses beyond our lifetime in this chamber. Before Senator Binay was born, this was already a law. She's the youngest
1997, for the record.
No. 1997.
Author daw si Senator Soto, 1997.
No. Senator Cheese was in prep, and Senator Binay was not yet born, and I was still a practicing journalist, and you were still studying law. And this was already a law. And we are now, I'm a 3-term senator, you're on your 2nd term, and it's still unfunded. Should we allow that, Mr. President?
No.
So, let us fund it for 330 million, Mr. President, so that we can walk our talk, and let it not be said that this Congress ignored a very important law.
I thought it was 1.3 billion, Madam Sponsor.
1.2 billion, but as I explained, Mr. President,
1.2?
gumawa sila ng paraan at sila po ay nag-designate ng RTC para
Yes, ma'am.
maging family court. Kaya po, ang nananatili na lang ay 330 million na 54 courts na maaari
to
po
be designated
to be
again.
designated.
Yun na nga, babalik ngayon ako
Yes.
sa aking thesis. this is not actually a case of an unfunded law. Maybe this is a case of a misinterpretation of the law. Because RA number 8369, Section 3, says there should be established a family court in every province and city in the country. Okay, that's the general rule. And then, your law, Senator Soto, this is your law. So you remember, Section 17 may transition provisions. Pending the establishment of such family courts, the Supreme Court shall designate from among the branches of the regional trial court, meaning to say, designation is a transitory mechanism. But it is now 2014. 17 years later, we're still in the transitory. And the Supreme Court has been asking for money. DBM has been denying the request for funds. Therefore, my point is, that's why, sana kung may DBM dito, the interpretation of the law, whose interpretation is correct? That is the designation already compliant with the law, or the law requires establishment of separate family courts?
Mr. President.
The Chair recognizes the Chairman of the Committee on Finance.
With the indulgence of Senator Pimentel. Mr. President, the DBM and Congress provides for appropriation cover for the creation of new courts. In accordance with our system, it's the Supreme Court that decides, through the JBC, which courts will actually be created and filled up, whether it's a family court, whether it's a drug court, an RTC, an MTC, an MCTC. Now, in previous years prior to this Congress, we have been allocating funds for the establishment of such new courts without new courts actually being established. And that's where the 1.3 billion for 2013, the over 2 billion for 2014, and the over 2.8 billion in 2015 in savings, that's where the savings of the Supreme Court comes from. So, it's not entirely accurate to say that Congress or DBM never funded this law. Only that, it's the Supreme Court that gets to decide ano ba yung uunahin nilang i-create. Family court ba? Drug court ba? MTC ba? MCTC ba? Depende rin po sa lugar, as you know in the JBC now. Minsan, hindi natin ma-fill-upan yung korte dahil kulang sa 3 yung nag-a-apply. So, hindi rin ma-create yung korte. Now, that issue came to the fore, especially in the last Congress, when we found out the huge savings the Supreme Court had, which was not being utilized to fill unfilled positions, in other words, to create new courts that had legislative cover already. So essentially, that has been the tug-of-war between Congress and the Supreme Court, na saan ba ginagastos yung savings na pang-create at pang-fill ng items to create new courts or to fill up vacant courts, tapos manghihingi sa Kongreso ng panibagong pondo na naman para mag-create ng korte, only to be turned into savings again. That's why since the beginning of this Congress, we introduced a new rule that said the money to fill up unfilled positions, newly created positions, will only be given to the Supreme Court and other constitutional bodies once the office is actually filled up. But before that, hindi yung ibibigay lang sa kanila basta-basta, and for them not to use it.
Para hindi savings.
Para maging savings at ma-realign sa ibang item. That's the situation we are in right now,
Okay,
Mr. President.
but Mr. President, I have noticed that when we create an RTC in a specific area, there is a law, specific law. We create an MTC, lower court, inferior court, there's a law. Now, RA 8369 establishes family courts in every city, in every province and city in the country. The question is this the legislative cover for the creation of family courts by the Supreme Court? And then the designation is just a transitory mechanism, nandun din sa law. And if the Supreme Court has been consistently asking for a big amount for establishment of family courts, therefore that is the interpretation of the Supreme Court of RA 8369. If DBM has been denying the request and allowing only funding for designation of existing RTCs, therefore DBM is interpreting the law in another way. So, tayo as legislators, we also have the power and the obligation to interpret our own laws. my interpretation is I'm siding with the Supreme Court. RA 8369 calls for the establishment of family courts. Because if the Supreme Court will give us figures now, hindi ba overloaded? Overloaded ang caseload ng yung formerly ordinary RTC na dinesignate ninyo na family court, overloaded siya. Tapos yung existing RTCs din na hindi designated as family court, hindi ba overloaded din sila? Therefore, siguro ang legislative intent nito is to really add courts because at the time this law was passed, overloaded na yung RTCs. So, the family-related cases needed help by the creation of courts which will concentrate on family-related cases.
In fact,
That's my interpretation, ma'am.
before the good senator arrived, I mentioned to Senator Cayetano that of the 118 established or designated family courts, which are RTCs, there's 61,000 caseload, but there are already also single sala courts handling family cases. So the need to establish family courts is a no-brainer. There is a need. The need to fully comply
Sabihin ko yun, ha?
with the family court law is a no-brainer. It is needed. Where to fund the 1.2 billion so that there could really be family courts, that is a question. Where to find 330 million so that we could have the balance of 54 RTC courts that could be designated family courts, that is also the question. My proposition as chair of this committee, with the concurrence of my colleagues, is to designate, in the meantime, 54 RTCs and to provide the 300 million needed.
Yes, ma'am. Agree. Kasi tinanggal din yun, ano? So, tinanggal din yung 300 million needed. Wala ngayon. So, yes, we'll back up that proposal because that's the transitory mechanism actually. So, basta balik tayo. I want to emphasize Section 3, family court in every province and city. So, we just have to count to comply with the minimum. So, number of provinces plus number of cities, that should be the minimum number of family courts mandated by Senator Soto's own law, 8369, to be created. So, hanapan natin ng solusyon ito. But is it fair, Madam Senator?
Another point, Mr. President. Not all provinces have family courts.
Kaya nga, but that's
Agusan, for example, Norte or Sur? Sur doesn't have a family court. So perhaps we should study which of the 80 provinces don't have family courts. And we should designate or create the court immediately.
Is it fair naman to challenge the Supreme Court to use their savings to establish, hindi designate, to establish the family courts? Is that a fair proposal?
Mr. President, I put on record where the savings go. Lest it be misunderstood. The savings do not go to their pockets, Mr. President, as bonuses. The savings goes to the wages of casual employees. It goes to transportation services. It goes to healthcare services. It goes to overtime. It goes to rice subsidy. Mr. President, hindi naman po pwedeng hindi savings the way it is. It is misconstrued. It could be misconstrued by media, and I don't want that to be misconstrued.
Okay. Anyway, Senator Cheese is already thinking of imaginative ways to comply with the law 8369. Pero pagtutulungan natin Congress, DBM as well as Supreme Court. We need also the help and the generosity of the Supreme Court to finally comply with RA 8369. That is actually my personal interpretation. Sige ma'am, pagdating po na time, okay. Ito naman, inabot lang po sa akin ito ng mga, may kaso siguro to sa korte. Let's talk about the accountability naman of the Supreme Court. Is there a system of an aging of cases in the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, Court of Tax Appeals, Sandigan Bayan, RTC, and inferior first level courts? Especially now na, we can use computers, hindi na po to mahirap.
There
Aging.
is-
When I ask for information, or when a justice wants to know how long has this case been pending before our court, dapat may kasabay din doon. How long has this case been pending in the courts, in the judicial system?
There's a court management office under the Office of the Court Administrator, Mr. President, that studies regularly, manages the aging of cases. And in fact, this has also been given priority by the Chief Justice. The Court Administrator's Office handles this under the Court Management Office.
Have we seen some improvement? So, because if we are now computerized, we can see the average aging of cases for this year, average for last year, average for 2 years ago. Has there been an improvement?
In fact, Mr. President, if I'm not mistaken, part of my committee amendment is the establishment of e-courts. And the establishment, you're correct, I provided for it. Yes. This is one of the requests of the judiciary, and we included it in our committee amendment. And with the establishment of the e-courts, this will actually decongest the courts.
Well, I'll take this opportunity to state a personal observation. I've been to an e-court, and I saw what they were doing. They were retyping all of the pleadings so that they will have the pleadings in digital file in their court. And I asked them, what else? That's it.
We have allocated.
Is that all? Is that all the e-courts? Because you just want to digitize. And actually, when you retype and then when you create, if you make an error, the error will be carried over. Yung original, walang error. Pag retype, may error. Doon pa sa digital file, may error na.
It will,
Personal po to, personal experience.
Mr. President, the good senator will be happy to note that 250 million has been allocated for connectivity of the e-courts, and hopefully this will decongest. So we've provided for that. 250 million
I
has
know,
been
ma'am. I know, ma'am.
allocated.
Yung e-courts kasi, yung e-court system, it's in the details.
Even the monthly reports, Mr. President, will be submitted, will be computer generated.
Yeah, ayun, okay.
Yes.
Okay. In fairness to the Supreme Court, I also heard a report where there is an e-court where they can give the order immediately after the order is issued, and the copy of the order is signed by the judge and then given to the counsel and the parties. So no need for mailing or for service. So that's one part of using. Ang meaning kasi ng yata dun is electronics, so use of computers.
Yes.
So may use na yun ng computer. But sana there should be more, no? What else?
Yeah.
What else? What other high-tech technology or whatever high technology we can still use in the justice system? So, aside from printing immediately the order, sana meron pa pong ibang ideas.
May I just put on record, Mr. President, for our education. These are what the e-courts can do. It speeds up the decision-making through automated monitoring of cases. It clearly cuts case backlogs. It increases public access to information, and it bolsters transparency. And apart from that, Mr. President, just so that it is on record, you mentioned about the disposition of cases. And to be fair to all the courts, the reforms have shown improvements in the adjudication of cases. In 2014, more or less 456,015 cases have been adjudicated, compared to 2012, 392,849, and 2013, 416,947. So we can see an improvement in cases solved.
Since Senator Soto is here, I want to talk about the drugs law. No? Is it true that the criminal docket is being clogged by drugs cases?
There are many drugs cases.
Kasi na-request nila, review.
There are many drug cases, according to them, Many of these are small cases, bailable,
And is the Supreme Court
but non-bailable.
Uh,
And there's an effort to try to speed up these cases.
is there no call or appeal for Congress to review our drugs law so that we will rationalize the quantities being penalized, the possession of the quantities?
I will leave it to the expert
No, I'm
here,
asking,
Senator
I'm
Soto.
asking if there is a call from the judiciary because siyempre may feedback mechanism yan sila from the lower court all the way up to the Supreme Court. Justice, ito po daming 80% ng kaso ko, puro drugs, na ang lilit ng quantities involved. Hindi ko na nga makita kung meron pa ba doon sa evidence pack na binibigay sa akin, mga ganon.
It is a prerogative of Congress to review it. And in fact, yes, they would support such. But this has to be studied thoroughly. And I will leave it to the better judgment of the expert on the anti-illegal drug campaign.
Sige po. Senator Soto wants to interject, Mr. President, something.
Yes, Senator Soto.
Mr. President, with the permission of the
Just for the
Our
record,
colleagues.
also, sorry, I thought I was. There are 29,951 drug cases, Mr. President, in 60 drugs courts, but they're also handling other courts are also handling drug cases. However, there are some 60 drug courts. 60 drug courts only.
Mr. President, with your permission, I filed a bill recently allowing plea bargaining. It is not allowed in Republic Act 9165, the Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002. But through the years, I have learned that it would probably be easier for the courts, for the enforcers, and for additional or easy information we can gather from the drug traffickers. If we allow plea bargaining, this would probably help in decongesting and resolving these issues. We would like to seek the wisdom of the courts, the Supreme Court in particular, on this particular issue. We will send them a copy of the bill and ask them to comment and the possibility of passing that particular bill to amend Republic Act 9165.
Thank you, Senator Soto. May I ask the Supreme Court for their opinion? No? I will compare the drugs courts to the family courts. What is the interpretation of the Supreme Court? Did the Dangerous Drugs Act or any anti-drugs law call for the creation of drugs courts or designation of drugs courts? I will compare this now to the language of the law creating the family court. We have drugs courts, but that's in compliance with the law. What does the law require? Establishment of a drugs court or the designation of a drugs court?
The
Iba.
The law allows the designation, Mr. President.
Precisely, Madam Sponsor, that is what I'm highlighting. That in the other courts designated with special jurisdiction, because the law allows the designation.
Designation.
That's why I'm repeating my observation that RA 8369 calls for establishment, not designation. Establishment of the family court. So anyway, one last second to the last point.
Before your point, may I clarify that the total amount for e-courts is not 150 only. It is 600 million. Your committee, Mr. President, has allocated 60 million for 600 million for ICT e-courts.
Allocated. So, okay.
Yes, Mr.
So
President.
allocated means it's in the bill.
Yes.
It's in the bill.
It's in our committee report,
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
President. In short, dinagdagan natin.
Yes.
Wala po yan, kinat po ng DBM. Dinagdag po ng inyong komite. Dahil ako po'y nakakaintindi ng inyong advokasya at lahat po sa kanila na kailangan pong connectivity, kailangan ng e-court, kailangan ng ICT para po pumadali ang pagresolba ng ating mga kaso. Kaya ang inyong committee po ay nagsaad na may amendment po ng 600 milyon. Milyon. Okay,
600 million, yes.
600.
Yes, ma'am. Does the Supreme Court acknowledge the fact that judges of lower courts receive allowances from local government units?
Yes, I believe so. It is pursuant to the local government code. Your father is the author of the local government code. Yes, judges receive allowances from local government units.
And also, since they are aware of this, so they know the reality that salaries and allowances of lower court judges are augmented by the LGU. So, are they considering this also, the amounts in their when they propose additional salaries, allowances, and benefits for their judges? They are already considering the LGU extended assistance? Or they're disregarding the LGU extended assistance?
Again,
Kasi iba-iba.
despite the fact that it is in the law, it is not also complied with by all LGUs. However, they take it in consideration in the computation of the allowances. And the allowances are not uniform, Mr. President.
Yes, not uniform. Okay.
Hindi lahat po nagbibigay, hindi lahat pare-pareho ang bigay, pero alam po nila at ito po'y legal dahil ito po'y nakasaad sa local government code.
So, may we know from the Supreme Court if they're calling for a review of such a provision allowing LGU assistance to judiciary?
Not really.
Is it better to have this wall between local executives mo yan, executive branch mo local, which might be do you want this border so that there will be no cross-border assistance?
Are you saying that it could be unconstitutional?
Because
there is cross-border allowance?
because of the latest Supreme Court decision.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yan ang tanong ko.
Oh, that's interesting. I never realized that, no?
The opinion.
But that is the law of your father, Mr.
I know,
President.
1991 po yun. So
Yes.
the DAP decision is 2014.
So are you initiating a review? Right now, there is no review according to the members of the judiciary. However, if Your Honor would review that and to
Yes.
amend the
And
law
for
of
them
your
also-
esteemed father, why not?
And for them
because
also-
it is a cross-border allowance.
For them also, Madam Sponsor, for the Supreme Court itself to also review such a setup because they issued the DAP decision.
Yes. In line with the Supreme Court Chief Justice advocacy for judicial independence, Mr. President, I think it is about time that this 1991 law, authored by your esteemed and distinguished father, be reviewed in light of the DAP ruling of the Supreme Court for cross-border allowances. It is not for us to decide. However,
Yes, but the Supreme Court can also issue their own circulars to judges. Madam Sponsor, can you
They are in favor.
confirm
Yes.
the existence of the power of the Supreme Court? with the Supreme
I
Court?
confirm that they are willing to have it reviewed, Mr. President.
They themselves can issue the circular. But at any rate, Madam Sponsor,
In line with full transparency and judicial independence, there is no reason why they should not agree. And in fact, yes, they say that they agree that it should be reviewed.
because we have received complaints that sometimes when the LGU or the mayor or the politician is sued, the complainants do not succeed at the level of the courts receiving assistance from the LGU. So, in some areas, hindi po lahat, but I have received such complaints. Anyway, I'd like to manifest my committee's willingness and availability to accept all proposals to help in the speedy and fair, impartial administration of justice, as well as to improve the situation of all those working in the judiciary, from employees all the way to justices of the Supreme Court. Thank you very much, Madam Sponsor, Mr. President. Thank you.
I thank Your Honor for your very friendly and supportive interventions, and I would wait for your individual amendments, if any, for the funding of the family courts, if you wish. Also, before we end this, Mr. President, I have the list of the designation of family courts for Senator Pia Cayetano. When the law was enacted in year 2000, there were 67 courts that were designated, and I have the list here every year. almost, there's a designation. And in 2013, there were 4 courts. In 2014, there was 1 court. In 2012, there was 1 court. In 2011, there were 3 courts, and I can give you the list right now. Tapos na.
Mr. President,
The majority, the chair of the committee is recognized.
thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, no other member registered to interpolate on the proposed budget of the judiciary. So may therefore move that we close the period of interpolation and debate and consider as submitted the proposed budget of the judiciary to include the Supreme Court of the Philippines and lower courts, the Presidential Electoral Tribunal, the Sandigan Bayan, the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Tax Appeals. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is carried.
May I request for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President? May we ask the Dole to kindly situate themselves in the first gallery.
What's this? What is- Ay, si Frank. Manong.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, no member registered to interpolate on the following agencies. May I therefore move that we close the period of interpolation and debate and consider submitted the proposed budget of the following: the Anti-Money Laundering Council. Letter C, Commission on Filipino Overseas. I'm following the lettering, Mr. President.
Yes, yes. The chair is following the
Letter E, Commission on the Filipino Language. Letter T, National Commission on Indigenous Peoples.
Can we have it again?
Letter T, Tango.
Tango. All right. Hold on. We're looking for that.
I don't know how this is arranged, Mr. President. I'm just going down. Same page, Mr. President.
I don't see it in my list, but never mind.
National
okay,
Intelligence Coordinating Agency.
Okay.
Pasig River Rehabilitation Commission. Games and Amusements Board.
What's letter I? Okay, letter I.
Letter I. Letter J, Governance Commission for Government-Owned and Controlled Corporations. Letter M, Mindanao Development Authority. Letter U, for our purposes, National Commission on Muslim Filipinos. National Security Council. Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process. Optical Media Board. On the next page, Mr. President, the Philippine Racing Commission, the Presidential Communications Development and Strategic Planning Office, the Presidential Legislative Liaison Office, the Presidential Management Staff, under OEOs, further, Mr. President, on government corporations, the Cultural Center of the Philippines, the Development Academy of the Philippines, the Philippine Center for Economic Development, the Philippine Postal Corporation, and the Southern Philippines Development Authority. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the agencies, other executive offices enumerated by the chairman of the Committee on Finance, the budgets of these agencies are hereby submitted for the consideration of the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Just for the purpose of clarity, would the chairman now be able to enumerate what are the remaining agencies under OEO?
Yes, Mr. President. The remaining agencies are as follows: Climate Change Commission, NCCA proper, National Historical Commission, National Library, National Archives, HLURB and HUDCC, which was moved for Monday, Mr. President, NAPSI, or National Anti-Poverty Commission, Philippine Commission on Women, Philippine Sports Commission, Presidential Commission for the Urban Poor, Dangerous Drugs Board, the Film Development Council of the Philippines, MTRCB, National Telecommunications Commission, PIDEA, and for OEO government corporations, the housing corporations, Mr. President, were moved to Monday.
Thank you very much, Senator Scudero.
May I now ask, Mr. President, that we consider the proposed budget of the Department of Labor and Employment as well as its attached agencies and offices. And for this purpose, may I ask that we recognize... May I request for a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Suspended for 1 minute.
Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, may I ask that we recognize Senator Pia, who I understand intends to make a manifestation in connection with the proposed budget of the Department of Labor.
Can we first place the budget?
Mr. President, I move that we begin consideration of the budget of the DOLE and open the period of interpellations and debate for the same. I so move, Mr. President.
The consideration of the budget of the Department of Labor and Employment is in order. May we know who is the sponsor for the budget?
I am the sponsor, Mr.
The
President.
Chair of the Finance Committee.
Sorry, I'm wearing two hats, Mr. President. May I ask that we recognize Senator Pia, Mr. President? I will stand over there, Mr. President.
Senator Pia Cayetano is recognized for the period of interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, Mr. President, I'd just like to put on record that my concern was about sexual harassment-related cases that were brought to our attention over the last year or so. And I've had a discussion with the Secretary, and I am more than happy to know that they have been dealing with this issue very seriously. And instead of using the time on the floor, we will be meeting separately so that I can continue to coordinate with them to ensure that our kababayans, especially the women who are working out of the country and are in very much need of assistance, when they go to our offices there, we want to be assured that the people who are there to help them are not the perpetrators of crimes against them. So with that, Mr. President, I will no longer be propounding any questions, as we will be meeting separately on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cayetano. Yes, the chairman of the committee, Senator Escudero, is recognized.
Also, our thanks to Senator Cayetano, Mr. President. Mr. President, no other member registered to interpellate on the budget of the DOLE as well as its attached agencies and offices. May I therefore move that we close the period of interpellation and debate and consider as submitted the budget of the DOLE as well as its attached agencies, namely the Office of the Secretary Proper, the Institute of Labor Studies, the National Conciliation and Mediation Board, the National Labor Relations Commission, National Maritime Polytechnic, National Wages and Productivity Commission, Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, Professional Regulation Commission, and the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, or TESDA. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. The period for interpellation of the budget of the Department of Labor and Employment is hereby terminated, and the budget of the DOLE is deemed submitted to the plenary session.
May I request for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President?
Suspended for 1 minute. Ano? Sure. What do you mean? Oh, okay, fine. Okay. Two.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, no member registered to interpolate on the budget of the following agencies, namely the National Commission for Culture and Arts, the National Library of the Philippines, National Archives of the Philippines, National Anti-Poverty Commission, Philippine Commission on Women. I move that we close the period of interpolation and debate for these agencies and consider their proposed budget as submitted. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objections? The proposed budget of the agencies enumerated by the chairman of the committee is hereby deemed submitted.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend session and further consideration first of House Bill number 4968 contained in Committee Report number 90. I so move, Mr. President.
Consideration of General Appropriations Bill under House Bill number 4968 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend session until 2 p.m. this afternoon. I so move, Mr. President.
Session is suspended until 2 o'clock this afternoon.